Welcome to Talitera, a podcast about freelance educators working in natural resource fields and environmental education. Who are these educators? What do they do? Join me, and let's find out together. This is your host, Tanya Marion. Today my guest is Kalliopi Monoyios, a visual creative dedicated to communicating the wonders of the natural world. After receiving her degree in geology at Princeton University, Kalliopi built a career as a scientific illustrator, working for paleontologist Neil Shubin at the University of Chicago. Her illustrations have appeared in top science journals like Nature and Science, and in 4 popular science books, including the New York Times bestseller, Your Inner Fish by Neil Shubin. Now driven by the conviction that science communicators in all domains are key to creating a scientifically literate public, Kalliopi is developing new avenues for public engagement around science through her art and exhibitions. Today we learn about her current exhibition, about society's relationship with plastic. Let's join the conversation. Thank you, Kalliopi, for stopping by to talk about your exhibition about plastic and also about your work as a science communicator. So welcome. And may I ask you to introduce yourself to listeners, please?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me, first off. I am a science communicator. I work in the visual arts, and I started my career as a science illustrator in the lab of the paleontologist Neil Shubin. And I worked there for about 11 years until switching gears to go freelance. And that's when I started focusing more on my fine art work. But I still maintain a very strong connection to science communication. And that's really my motivating factor in all of the work that I do.
This past weekend, you launched a brand new exhibition at a museum in Colorado. And before we get there to the exhibition, before we start to talk about that, can you tell us about how you came to work in the field of science communication? What is it that drew you to the field?
Sure. I was always interested in both science and art. I'm sure, like probably many of the people who are in this field, stories about how those two were always themes throughout my childhood. But I never really realized that they could be combined into a career until actually after college. So I ended up majoring in geology. And because I took the very wise advice of my dad that art can be a hobby, but it doesn't make a career. But shortly after college, I got a job as a fossil preparator with Neil Shubin, the paleontologist, as he was setting up his new lab at the University of Chicago. And we were at a Society for Vertebrate Paleontology meeting and on a hike, just in one of the down times when there weren't lectures happening. And he said, "What do you want to do with your life, Cappy?" And I said, I had just seen these beautiful monographs that in the library he had sent me to go get some papers. And I had just seen these gorgeous monographs by O.C. Marsh of Triceratops. And I was just blown away that somebody could do that. And so, he gave me this little opening on this hike. And I said, well, I'd kind of like to try science illustration. I didn't realize that was a thing until I had seen those monographs. So that was the very beginning. And he was an incredible mentor. He was like, "Oh, that's cool. I could use a science illustrator." At the time I was doing fossil preparation, which is extracting the fossils from the rocks. There was another science illustrator in the department who worked for the paleontologist Paul Sereno. And she taught a scientific illustration course for grad students. And so I was able to get in on that. And then I found the Guild of Natural Science Illustrators, and they are just a wealth of information and skill building at a very affordable prices. And I was able to kind of build my career that way in science illustration. the really unique and wonderful thing about working with Neil Shubin is that he's very focused on bringing science to broad swaths of people not just in academia. During the pandemic, he was zooming into kids' classrooms to talk to them about paleontology and evolution. So I really was able to learn firsthand what good science communication can be. And I got to practice because I was doing the slides for his talks and I was illustrating his popular nonfiction books for the general public. And so that really opened my mind to the fact that art can be a vehicle to communicate science very broadly. And so here I am doing my own work, but with that same ethos that I learned in his lab.
Now, for many years, you also had a blog, and your blog was part of the Scientific American network.
That's right. In 2011, I co-founded Symbiartic with Glendon Mello, and later we brought on Katie McKissick to join us. And that was actually, I would say, part of this awakening in me that a lot of people were combining science and art in ways that weren't just pure science illustration for peer-reviewed journals. There were a lot of scientists who practiced art on the side. They were deeply inspired by what they saw, and they were able to bring it to the public in fine art practice. And then there were also lots of fine artists who were deeply inspired by the science and the natural world that they were encountering, and they were incorporating it into their work. And so the Scientific American blog Symbiartic was, I guess we were online for 6 years or so, 6 or 7 years. And that was really an exploration of all the incredible artists who are out there and scientists who are out there combining science and art in the myriad ways that they do.
So after Symbiartic, after you worked on the blog and had that, and you've been very active in the Guild of Natural Science Illustrators, and you are currently the president of the Guild.
Yes.
And how many other ways then did you start to do science communication that went beyond the way that it is defined, by the Guild or by the, by doing journals, interpretive panels, and that type of thing? How many avenues have you explored?
Yeah, that's a good question. I tend to follow my skills. The freeing thing about being a fine artist is that you can follow your own set of skills and interests, and even in my opinion, there's more of a connection conceptually with the materials you choose, the techniques you choose, and the message you're trying to convey. Science illustration sort of removes those what would you call those? Those connections. It's more you have a purpose. You are communicating a very specific set of ideas within very, very defined
parameters.
Parameters, thank you. And techniques. I mean, they're standards and conventions. That was the word I was looking for. There are conventions and standards that are very important to maintain for consistency's sake. You have illustrators across centuries conveying information to scientists, and the scientists need to be able to know how to read them without having to interpret context or whatever else can cloud knowledge transfer. So the science illustrator is doing something slightly different than the fine artist. But in terms of the public who doesn't have a preset, like a pre-learned set of skills that allow them to approach diagrams or figures in certain ways, you're kind of meeting them hopefully wherever they are. And so as a fine artist, you have to be more creative and be able to kind of empathize with your viewers and understand where they might be coming from, and then try to anticipate what will catch their attention.
Your current exhibition is called Patterns of Consumption, and it is on view at the Littleton Museum in Littleton, Colorado. This isn't your first exploration of plastic. How did you come to study or work with plastic specifically?
Yeah, I'll also add it's not going to be my last. I think plastic is one of the foremost environmental problems of our time. It's defining. I mean, climate change and plastic, and actually because plastic is a petroleum product, those two are linked intricately. So in my little way, I feel like I'm also working on climate change. You ask how I started this line of inquiry. And the answer is I've always been environmentally conscious. I've always tried to reduce my footprint environmentally, ecologically. And I don't know what year it was, but maybe about 7 or 8 years ago, we got access to a city composting system in Denver. And we got the bin and realized very quickly that the remainder of what we were throwing out in our trash was plastic packaging. And like I said, we're a family that doesn't use Ziploc bags. We don't use plastic cling wrap. So it was surprising how much plastic we were still throwing away. Being a science communicator, I thought, what's the most powerful way I could communicate to people the impact of all these daily decisions that we make out of convenience, and because we're part of this system, in the 21st century. And I thought immediately, of course, plastic is light, so the weight is not very impressive, and it compacts. It's pretty thin. Volume's not impressive, but area, now that's where we could make some statements. And so I pulled some plastic out of the trash, and I was curious to know whether I could quilt it together to maximize the area that we cover and see, could I, for example, I imagined we could take a project to school and see if we could wrap a school bus in the plastic generated from the lunch of the kids, or could we cover the playground, or could we wrap the school? And really, that was the very beginning of this wonderful exploration, which has been incredibly fruitful, because what I realized very quickly was that, oh my gosh, plastic is not just bags and straws. It's so much more. Our lives are steeped in plastic. And really, if you're honest with yourself, it makes modern life possible. There's so many instances of plastic that are indispensable. The pandemic brings one absolutely to the fore, which is personal protective equipment, right? Nobody's about to give up that, and nor should they. So I very quickly arrived at this crossroads where I realized, my goodness, I think a lot of the environmental groups focus on how evil plastic is, but maybe we could talk to more people if we were honest about how dependent we are on it and how integral it is to our lives right now. And so I began to search for funny and quirky uses of plastic that would wake people up to this idea that we're so enmeshed with this material that just advocating a plastic-free existence is just not realistic. But at the same time, awakening them to the urgency of this situation, that we are filling up our world with plastics, which are petrochemicals, which are very quickly making their way into the food chain and our environment in ways that, and interacting, we have no idea how these impact human health, though we have ideas that it might not be great.
Yeah, that's something that jumped out at me when I was reading your description for this current exhibition, is that your position is that we do need plastic, that you are not advocating an all-out ban on plastic. You are recognizing the value of plastic and a need for, like you said, medical equipment, from masks to catheters to, syringes to all sorts of things that are necessary. And when you take this posture, when you present that to a public audience, what is their response? I mean, let me ask this way. Have you ever made a public presentation where you anticipate some resistance and some severe pushback, from people in the audience. And then when you stated your position and how you're really there to have a very reasonable conversation, has that changed the audience's posture? And what kinds of conversations have you had with the public?
Well, what I've found is that people are remarkably open to this conversation when you get rid of the guilt, right? I think that the mistake that a lot of environmental groups make is that they play that guilt string maybe too much. And that works for some people. It worked for me. I mean, I respond to that. But the wonderful thing about living in Colorado is a very purple state. And I think there are a lot of people for whom it does not resonate. But what I've found is in treating the topic in this way, that we are all part of this system. None of us is perfect. None of us is able to fully extract ourselves from this system, unless you're a homesteader who spends all your time making your own food and weaving your own cloth. And I mean, it's just not possible today to extract ourselves from the system that we've created. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Every generation has had its environmental triumphs and its environmental calamities. And I would say that plastic is a material triumph. It's the most versatile material we've ever created. It is cheap. It allows for if you think on the positives, like light, it's light. So it's allowed us to lighten aircraft and other vehicles, and therefore reduce fuel consumption. The plastic packaging that encases our food prevents food spoilage and pests infestations, right? I mean, there are a lot of ways in which plastic is really advancing modern life. But of course, we know the environmental implications. It's breaking down. It never goes away. Every single pair of shoes I've ever owned in my 43 years still exist on this planet somewhere, right? Every single toothbrush I've ever used still exists on this planet. And it will for the next 400 to 700 years, unless it gets incinerated. So I mean, these are long-term impacts that we should really be thinking about. And really the thing that I think is the greatest motivator and the greatest strength of humanity is hope. Contrary to, all the grandmas out there who love to lay on the guilt, I don't think guilt is a great motivator. I think hope is a better motivator. So what I'm hoping is that by approaching this topic with clear eyes and recognition that plastic is both a game changer for modern life, but also has these terrible environmental impacts, I am banking on human ingenuity. We made this stuff. We can solve the problems that it poses environmentally. And we just need political will, and that is so often pushed by public opinion, right? So I'm working on the public opinion part.
Okay, so as you work on the public opinion part, how do you help people who come to see your exhibition? How do you help them explore plastic? Can you take us on a tour through your exhibition?
Sure. Well, like I said, the thing that has drawn me to science and the natural world is wonder and awe. And so that is kind of the tool, and beauty. Those are the tools that I use to pull people in. Like I said, I'm trying to avoid guilt and shame because as counterproductive emotions. So I lead with beauty. So when you walk into my exhibit, you'll see it's calm. It's the pieces. I have two kind of lines of work. One are quilts that I make out of single-use plastic packaging, and they're purposely neat and tidy and beautiful, and they sort all the incredible colors that the marketers use on our packaging into really pleasing visual arrays. And the reason why I do that is because I want people to stop looking at the material as utilitarian, as a food wrapper, as trash, honestly. And I want them to see it for the material that it is. Like, this is a material that brings food to our tables, keeps it from spoiling, keeps the weevils out. It's a workhorse in our society. And I want people to forget that it's trash. I want to remove that filter, right? And I want them to see it as this beautiful material that makes modern life possible. I started quilting, as I said, because I was interested in just the sheer area of plastic that we produce. But I continue to quilt because quilts were always made from the scraps of our lives. And because we are no longer producing our own clothing, we're producing plastic waste instead. Somebody else makes our clothing. And so I thought, that's kind of funny. Like, we should be making quilts out of our waste, which is what's in my trash, which is plastic packaging. So those are the kind of colorful and playful pieces in this exhibit, Patterns of Consumption, that's currently at the Littleton Museum. I actually was able to collect a year of plastic from a family of 4. And I made a huge 26-foot by 26-foot quilt out of it. I made banners, and each month is represented by one banner. And it's an incredible piece. It's mind-boggling. It's got archaeology. It's got they were actually a family that was moving around the country every 3 months for the husband was a VA nurse, a traveling VA nurse. And so they were moving every 3 months. The kids were being homeschooled. So all of their trash was basically collected, captured. And it's a wonderful geographic study. It's a wonderful snapshot in time. It was collected between January 2019 and January 2020. So it was a real interesting snapshot right before the pandemic. And it's impressive to see all of that plastic together. And granted, it's not all the plastic they used, right? Because it's not bottles and it's not hard plastic, but it was all the plastic I could sew. Then you ask how I pull people in, and even, of course, an exhibit is up when I'm not there. So I'm hoping that people interact with the artwork without my help and they get it. So the other techniques I use are surprising items that people might not know are plastic, but they've already understood that the exhibit is made of all plastic items. So when they read the label that this is an embroidery done with dental floss, they're like, what? Dental floss is plastic? Yes, it is. So I like to kind of throw, curveballs at people that way.
Mm-hmm. Now, I remember a while back you had asked, there was conversation about cables, old charger cables and all that. What became of that?
Yeah, so cables are really interesting, and I was drawn to them because to me they represent planned obsolescence, which is, every 3 or 4 years they come out. Well, not every year. Electronics companies in particular are notorious for coming out with the latest and greatest that you're supposed to switch over to. And yet your phone works perfectly well 7 years later, 8 years later, until they stop supporting the software and actually force you to get a new phone, right? And I find that practice very frustrating. I think a lot of people do. And because not only when you get a new phone, of course, you get all the new cords that come with it. And all the doodads that worked with your previous phone, they no longer work with your new phone. And you have to go through the process, blah, blah, blah. And it feels very wasteful. So I was interested in collecting. Oh, I should also say, I think a lot of people have a drawer of that stuff because it's a very human instinct to not throw away stuff that has use still, right? Yeah, you're
I have a drawer like that.
Yeah, I think most people do. And so I was interested in pulling those items out and using them in art pieces because I feel, again, I'm looking for points of common experience across every single political spectrum and every single socioeconomic perspective to the point that it's possible. I think everyone has cell phones, and I think everyone has those cords, right? So what became of them? So I've made a couple of different pieces. One of them, which was my favorite, is called Why Me? And it's this pink extension cord that I found. I should say, I was very lucky to be able to work with this company called Ridwell. I think they're in 3 or 4 cities now. And they are one of these companies that collects hard to recycle items. And they find local companies that can recycle or reuse them responsibly. So in this case, I was able to contact them and get cords. And there was this lovely fluorescent pink extension cord in there. I mean, and I'm telling you, when they collect cords, like, they are serious. There was like a warehouse full of them. Said, how many would you like? And I'm looking at my little cart. I'm like, I'll take 6. It was pretty funny. But anyway, I did sort through, and I found some gems, and the pink extension cord was certainly one of those. And it occurred to me that these cords represented, all of them still work. Every single one, I guarantee you, if you could find the right technology to hook it up to, it still works. So to me, it was this big statement on our consumption, our patterns of consumption, hence the name of the exhibit. And what I started to do, and maybe I was getting a little loopy at the end of my time preparing for the exhibit, because this was the very last piece I made, I imagined that these cords, like, they were kind of sad when people threw them out because they still had so much to give. And so this pink extension cord became the centerpiece of a very simple piece where I kind of bent it so that it writes in script, why me? Kind of having a little pity party for itself that it got thrown away. and that got me thinking, probably I'm not a religious scholar, but I suspect I might not be wrong in that the belief that for hundreds of thousands of years, humanity has imbued inanimate objects with spirits, or they're governed by, they have a life, an inner life, they have a dialogue, they have thoughts and feelings and ideas about the world. And so as I was looking at these cords that had all been discarded and they all had so much more to give, I thought, that's really interesting. I wonder, a lot of, I think, the traditions that humanity comes up with over the course of evolution, I think they exist for real purposes. They wouldn't arise if they didn't serve us in some way. And I wondered, the animism that is clearly lost. Okay, should I define animism? Animism is this idea that inanimate objects have spirits. So my thinking there was, that's largely gone from at least Western society. I know that still exists in, I think, Shinto and some others, other certainly polytheistic constructs. But in monotheistic world, that's, I think, largely done away with. And I just was thinking, like, how would that serve us to continue to practice animism and recognize that when we buy an object, we're making a commitment to it, right? How would that change our patterns of consumption? I credit a little bit Marie Kondo and I think contemporary Japanese society with this idea, because one of the things that I've been following and learning about, though I still have much to learn, is this Japanese practice of sashiko, which is mending clothes with these beautiful embroidery techniques. But really what I'm learning from this one particular person on Instagram who has practiced this for, a very long time. I don't know how old he is, but he and his mother both have been practicing it for quite some time, is that it's really a spiritual practice. It's about honoring the clothes, and it's about showing them respect and gratitude for the hard work that they do for you, keeping you clothed. So I think that kind of a mental shift is a really interesting one in this consumerist society. Like, what if when we bought an X, Y, or Z, we really made a commitment to it, to live with it through the entire life of the product? It's different than the model that Apple is selling us.
You have a interactive activity with the public going on that helps people actually experience that, live with their plastic wrappers and with the plastic that they live with for a longer period of time and to experience it in a different way. Can you tell listeners about this really wonderful public engagement participatory project that you've created?
Yeah. Well, we're calling it What's Your Plastic Footprint? And it's a chance for schools or community groups to collect a week's worth of plastic from each of their homes, however many participants there are. They collect them, they wash them. I have a little video tutorial to show them how to wash the plastic appropriately so it doesn't gum up your sewing machine or attract critters. And then we're showing them how to piece the plastic together into banners that are 2 feet by 6 feet. And you just connect the plastic with Scotch tape on the back, and people can get as creative as they want to with the designs. You can cut it up. I mean, it's the colors. Once you start collecting, the colors are really wonderful. It's a fun material to work with. And then we're having volunteers at the museum sew them together into a big quilt that will display on the ground to kind of see how much area we can cover at the end, or I guess at the end of the exhibit in the middle of the summer. And I'm kind of using it as a test run to see if people enjoy this, to see if it is impactful. And if it is, I'd love to keep it going and get more people and see if we could cover, I don't know, the National Mall.
You are a teacher, an illustrator, an author, a fine artist, and you've taught people so many wonderful things, and you've helped people learn so many wonderful things. It's just in my experience with you, through the Guild of Natural Science Illustrator and other projects. When you look over your shoulder, back at the trail you've left behind, what do you see?
That's a fascinating question. I have no idea. What do I see? I suppose I see me sorting out a combination of the gifts I feel I've been given and the little tiny strange niches I've found where I feel that I can give back. I feel very strongly that my life and my work need to be in some way of service. And I feel that, unlike doctors and, social workers and teachers who are in the classroom working every day, I feel that my skills are sort of a little bit off and weird. And so it's been harder for me to find a path that is preordained, that has a clear way to a clear set of steps that get you from one, get you from one destination to the next. But I'm working it out. I suspect most artists feel that way, that part of the artist's path through the world is also creative, because there's no one way to connect and bring work to the public. That's a very interesting question. I would love to think more about that.
What's next for you? What are your next few steps, do you think?
I think the next steps after you put an exhibit out into the world, a body of work out into the world, is to listen to the reactions, and those inform the next steps. I have ideas of where I'd like to go, but really I think the most valuable thing that is on my plate next is to watch and to see how it's received. In the name of always improving and being responsive to your environment, I spent a lot of time internally working out these ideas, and I'd love to see how they're received. And that'll inform how I push out the next set of ideas. I'm pretty enthralled still with plastic, so I think I'll be continuing the plastic conversations, but I don't know exactly what's next on the horizon to talk about. A large part depends on what I learn from the public about where they are.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for your time today. And where can people find you online?
I have a website with my artwork. It's just my full name, KalliopiMonoyios.com. And then I'm also on Instagram at Kalliopi.Monoyios. I also have a Twitter account, which I occasionally remember to post to. And that handle is I for Science. But increasingly, I'm pulling away from social media because I'm finding a lot of joy in the real world interactions and the smaller community that I live in, where I can interact with people and get their responses and connect with them as humans.
To learn more about Kalliopi and to view images from the exhibition Patterns of Consumption, visit the show notes for this episode at talaterra.com. Here you will also find links to the Guild of Natural Science Illustrators, Ridwell, the Shubin Lab at the University of Chicago, and select posts from the Symbiartic blog. Thank you for joining us today. See you next time. Talaterra is a podcast for and about independent educators working in natural resource fields and environmental education. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with friends and colleagues. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is Tanya Marion.